You are listening to the Mary Jane Society podcast, where you will meet entrepreneurs, cultivators, scientists, doctors, and inventors in the cannabis industry.
I'm your host, Pam Schmiel, marketer and publicist in the cannabis industry. Today our guest is Kieve Huffman. He founded and operates Heavy Grass, a portfolio of pre-roll brands based in California. He expanded the product line into Mexico, built relationships throughout Latin America, and is a frequent guest speaker at B2B Conferences in Mexico and Colombia. Kieve is now working with other U.S. cannabis companies to build their brand awareness in Latin America. And he shares market insights in which country in South America that he's the most bullish on for brand expansion. Let's welcome Kieve. If you could give the listeners an overview of the legal landscape in Mexico, just to kind of give us some reference. I feel like we're not talking a lot about South America, in the US. And so I've always been intrigued because I know that you've, been kind of making inroads down there or, working in the industry down there. So I just thought, just to kind of, give us the lay term of what is the legal landscape down there.
In Mexico right now, it's interesting because several years ago, the judiciary branch of the government said that cannabis was legal. It was legal to grow, it was legal to consume, and that it should be legal to sell both medically as well as recreationally. And they basically said to the legislative branch that, okay, we need now that there to be an infrastructure, regulations put so that there can be a legal, industry. And, the thinking all along was that, there's a very established pharmaceutical industry there. That's the medical would go down that path. How things would roll out on the recreational side was a little bit unclear because there hasn't been any infrastructure for that. But regardless, the legislative branch continues to miss their deadlines. And, really at the end of the day, the current president's not a huge fan of it. So what's happened is that there's a large market for CBD right now in Mexico. There's a growing market for hemp-derived products down there that are under 1% THC. Those are all legal under the law down there. So there are opportunities for brands currently because if you can, fall under 1% THC, you can legally sell your products right now in Mexico. So that's pretty much what I've been focused on, is taking some brands down there for that. And then there's an enormous gray market going on because there's this, it's not legal, but it's not really illegal, so it's just it's very similar in many ways to actually New York, where, there's all of these sort of, dispensaries that aren't really legal, but there also isn't a lot of enforcement that's kind of going on. So it's interesting, Mexico is one of the largest, kind of countries out there, a rapidly growing middle class. So it's going to be an enormous cannabis market, and it's just a matter of time. But a lot is going to depend, like in so many other countries, on the political landscape. So who the next president is going to have a big say and in kind of where things go. But regardless, there are still current opportunities, particularly in the CBD and the hemp-derived side of things. Now, I do want to be clear that that's primarily related to these being kind of brought down as supplements, as sort of health-related supplements and not focused on anything recreational. So therefore, right now, I'm not working with any like smokables, down there. So that's kind of the cutoff. So there's a lot of opportunities for drinks and edibles and topicals and those kinds of things. So it's interesting, but it's as with everything else, it's always evolving as well.
Right, right. But what, like, so I feel like the CBD market just flattened out here. If it wasn't for the Delta 8 products, that's the only way the CBD companies are surviving. I feel like we're, far down the, it's far down the road. We need more research into its efficacy and how to formulate it to better target, what we're trying to target, the different, health ailments and whatnot. So, but I do think that topicals are kind of one of the drivers that are keeping the CBD market afloat. You just feel like you've heard a lot of anecdotal evidence that it works on the topical side. So I imagine that you can't legally manufacture and sell some sort of a Delta 8. So no, and nothing that produces anything psychoactive in Mexico, I'm pretty sure. Even though there's a gray market, even though it's not allowed here, we're doing it. And you said there's a big gray market. Are they doing it down there like we're doing it here in the CBD world?
It's starting to happen because really the distinction is on THC percentage. So there is no distinction between cannabis and hemp in Mexico. So really, it's if you test under 1% THC, then it's legal. So that is not the gray market that I'm talking about. The gray market is really the full THC products where that's
Mm.
and that's for both that can be done locally there, and that also can be imported. Anything under 1% THC can be imported down there. So we are starting to see some Delta 8 products go down there, but it's very early days, and it's kind of it remains to be seen in certain respects, like how much it's going to take off, and like what's going on here in this country with the Dells. Like, I mean, you see what just happened in Florida, and you're seeing that
Yeah,
starting to be a lot of crackdowns, on a state by state basis.
right.
How that's going to impact other countries as well, like Mexico, remains to be seen.
Yeah, so and it's two different target markets, the CBD that we're talking about, and then the topicals and that versus the Delta 8s. It's people who, right, okay.
Yeah, I'm not really focused on the gray market. So, I
Oh,
mean,
right, okay. Oh,
like
yeah.
I'm really focused on the legal market. But what I will say is that you would probably be surprised how many actual American products are already in Mexico. So um, that's really more what I'm referring to on the gray. And
Okay.
I'm not involved in that at all. I'm really focused on what's legally possible right now, and my business partners and associates in Mexico are lawyers, because I really want to stay on the side of, the law that, is I'm looking for the legal opportunities, because for me, as I think, Pam, I'm very much of a branding and intellectual property person. And so for me, uh I'm just interested in ways to be able to introduce brands early down there. And I want to do it in a way that makes sense for the audience, but also makes sense with what's legal. So that's why I'm focusing on CBD products, on hemp-derived products that are legal there. That's the focus that I'm taking right now. I mentioned the gray just because it's
Oh,
just
yeah,
to
just
give you the full landscape, but that's
yes,
that's not
yes.
what I'm doing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah, no, I understand. So I guess similar to what a lot of brands, THC brands in the United States are doing is they're launching a hemp line or a CBD line so that they could cross state lines and get their brand recognition. So that's kind of what you're offering brands in the United States to do that for them down in Mexico and South.
Exactly.
Okay. So and so are you just doing it with CBD products, or I know you also mentioned accessories, or how are you, like if I was a client who had a THC brand in the United States and I wanted to expand, like what would your approach be, or how would you recommend I go down there and start, like you said, building brand grassroots and time for legalization?
Yeah, so I mean, it's we take every brand on a case by case basis, right? Because
Yeah, of
it really
course.
depends on what the core products are here in the US for that brand, who their audience is, and then we look at what's possible, and applicable for Mexico. And what we're seeing quite a bit these days is that early on when we were talking to a lot of these brands, it was talking about actually creating products specifically for Mexico. But as you alluded to earlier, more and more of these brands are starting to move into hemp anyway. So it's now it's making sure that, they pass the testing down there. And if they do, then it becomes a matter of just looking at how it's packaged, making sure that we change the
Oh,
packaging to kind of have it be compliant with Mexico. And also looking at the branding and making sure that the brand itself makes sense and is localized for Mexico, because not every brand just instantly translates into other markets. And so yeah, it's a layered approach. I mean, there's a lot of different angles that we're looking at. It's not a one size fits all, but in general, we're trying to find products that makes sense as a way to introduce the brand and to build the brand up, so that when things do go legal, it's very easy to transition into the THC products, because they've already been introduced in a way that it makes sense to the audience down there. Like, I
yeah.
would recommend like going down if you're let's say you're um, a company that's really focused on flower, right? Like, I think it's hard for flower, brands to go down there unless they already have certain products here in the US that are edibles, or things like
Yeah,
that. So for instance, if you've got gummies and they're THC gummies, it's very easy to create hemp-derived versions of those, right? And so
oh,
you introduce those, it's very easy to transition from a gummy to a gummy. Flower is much harder to transition because, it's flower. Like, you could do hemp flower, but to me, then you can't even really import that. So you'd have to kind of use what's being produced down there. It's just a more challenging sort of angle to go at. Yes, there are plenty of cultivators down there. You know, uh,
it,
Quality is subjective, but most people tend to think that the quality is not as good as like a lot of the quality here in the US of a lot of the flour.
oh, really? Oh, as far as like craft, we excel more in the craft area than they do down there. Is that what?
Well, it's been an established market. So everything's been underground down there,
Right.
So because there's no legal structure, there hasn't been, like California. I mean, these craft farmers have been perfecting their craft for over 20 years, and so that's a huge head start uh,
Yeah.
for Mexico. So Mexico's always had a reputation for having a lot of cultivation going on down there, but it hasn't really benefited from, there hasn't been a legal avenue for them. So they've all had to be sort of underground to date.
Right. But they must be crafting underground, right? Like here they're all just, you know, so knowledgeable about all the, you could go a kid in a candy store with all the strains and the genetics and, crossbreeding and things. So is that a kind of a thing down there too? It must be, right? Because they're cultivators.
There must be. I'm not
Oh,
100%
okay.
familiar with it because
Oh,
it's really that
yeah, you're
that's
not
all
touching
playing in
flower.
that's all playing into the gray market down there.
Right.
But yes, I mean, there is a long history of cultivation in Mexico, and there's some amazing, craft cultivators down there. But yeah, I mean, look, it's like,
Yeah.
anywhere where the plant's being grown, there's going to be, a
Yeah.
craft the craft growers.
Right. Okay. So I see. So it wouldn't even make sense for a pre-roll brand to go down and try to partner with a grower because it's not even legal yet, but you can put the hemp into the gummies. So anything, okay, like the tinctures or the gummies, you could start building their brand on that down there.
Yeah, and that's why I say it's on a case by case because not it doesn't make sense for every brand right now based on what's legal,
Yeah.
because there are you pretty much can only have certain products for form factors that you can offer currently.
And is that gummies and tinctures? Is that basically all you can offer? Well, topicals, but that doesn't.
Uh, Not even, well, I mean, so primarily right now, what we're focused on are edibles and drinks.
Oh, drinks too. Oh, that's cool. So there's a line of drinks. Oh, that would be a great way to get your brand, expand your brand and kind of build brand down there too. Drinks. Are they allowed to sell the CBD drinks in liquor stores, or is it, well, I guess that's the only place they don't have dispensaries. They're not locked into a dispensary like here.
Yeah, I mean, it's because it's not illegal, you can really sell,
Oh,
them anywhere.
okay.
Now this hasn't really started happening yet. Like, to my knowledge, there's not a single US drink brand currently in Mexico.
Mhm.
I'm confidentially in discussions with several of them right now, certainly an interest in going down there. But this is all happening in real time right now. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, what about like just it's kind of I guess big on the West Coast, like terp-based drinks. Like just really playing on the terp and the effects you can get from that. That's just an idea I'm just throwing out there.
yeah, I mean, look, that's totally possible. It
Yeah.
just comes down to as long as it tests under 1%.
So aside from the edibles and drinks and that kind of stuff, if you're bringing a brand down there, would you, depending on the brand, like how are you stepping into like accessories and apparel? Because I know with your other brand, your California brand, you did a lot of accessories, I think, to kind of build out your brand in other states. I always found that interesting. Is that
Yeah,
what you're doing down
yeah.
there?
I mean, it depends on the brand, but that's
Yeah.
easy to do. It sometimes it gets into a little bit of a cost benefit analysis because if you if you're gonna be importing, there's costs associated with that, and then because the price
Oh,
sensitivity down there is a little bit lower, it kind of means that you should be producing as much as you can on the apparel side of things in Mexico. Uh,
yes.
my experience to date with that has not been super positive with the quality. So it's kind of, you have to be really careful. And then when you're talking about a lot of accessories, so a lot of the accessories that we offered, for instance, for one of my brands, Heavy Grass, were smoking accessories, and those were all coming from China. So getting those into Mexico is it it's totally possible, but again, it just becomes a cost issue, right? It's like when you
Right.
like kind of
Unless you're producing in Mexico, which Mexico is known for, I mean, Mexico was trying to pick up the slack from China and, Asian countries that are known for manufacturing. And I think a lot of people were looking at Mexico or have always looked at Mexico as an opportunity. So are you building connections down there for someone who might want to do that or getting to know who the manufacturers are and in case that's an avenue one of your brands could take.
I'm
Or
always looking for connections down there to do that, but I haven't found any to date because I was looking for it for Heavy Grass, uh,
oh, see.
and I couldn't find anyone. The
Mhm.
same way you can't really find anyone even in the US to do a lot of
No,
products. So it's you know, China kind of has a monopoly on a lot of these, form factors that I would love for there to be other options, but as of now,
Yeah.
I don't know of them down there.
Right. But now I'm realizing the importance of having someone like you down there, because if you are going to expand, you just need to have all these different resources and, things like that, to be able to launch that. So, like, what are the cultural differences that you, like, if you were looking from a branding perspective, you were talking about like, matching up, like the US brand to their cultural difference. Like for instance, in Europe, they like to mix their weed with tobacco. Ugh, that's so not American. Like that just doesn't usually happen, here. So is there something that you would say, that kind of stands out as a cultural difference down there, or their weed culture, um, that an American company would have to consider when trying to adapt their brand?
Yeah, so I'd say on the form factor side of things, they're very influenced by what's going on in the US. So I think it's a lot more similar to US than Europe is. When it comes to the culture, it depends on who the target audience is for the
Mm.
brand, and so it's like in any market, you kind of have to go on a case by case and take a look at, kind of what the best way is to speak to that market. What I see or I have seen in the past is when brands try to sometimes go down to Latin America, they try to have this one size fits all approach to all of Latin America and all the demographics. And it's a very, especially if you're going country by country, it's like there's complete differences in the slang and different ways the language is and all those different things. And I think for us, what we've been seeing with the brands that we're talking to is primarily what needs to be looked at is, does the brand itself, does the name, does the look and feel, is it going to work down there? And sometimes they don't, like they're, because it's such like and I don't want to give up any of the names because I'm under
Yeah.
non-disclosure for a lot of these brands, but some of them just don't make sense down there. Some of them really do, because what you have to understand is that there is in the Mexican market, they actually love American brands. They love US brands.
Oh,
And but the brand has to make sense, and sometimes they just don't. Like,
yeah.
especially I've seen because a lot of brands in the US, because they're created very localized, they're very specific to a region sometimes, these
Mhm.
brands. And that
Mhm.
doesn't really mean anything down there. So a lot, if your brand is tied to a state or a region, then that kind of has less appeal than if you're seen as a national brand. Like, so a lot of these bigger cannabis brands that we all know, there's a huge appeal for that, right? Like, oh, that's going to work because it's seen as like, oh, this is a big US brand. And then the perception down there is that US products in these areas are better. So it's interesting. A lot of people think you have to cut your prices if you're going to go to Mexico. Well, what we're seeing is that the prices can kind of stay the same because the U.S. brand and product perception is that they're high quality. So people are willing to spend pretty much more or less the same amount that they would have to spend if they came to the US. Also, because Mexico, there are so many, Mexican families that are split between the US, and there's a
Oh,
lot of travel. So they're just used to seeing these brands already when they're travels, and they're used to paying the prices if they come and travel, for instance, to California. So I do think Mexico in particular is very interesting and very unique. It's why I'm focused on it, because it's much easier, I think, to take a US brand down there than it is to take a US brand to Europe right now.
so I know you're speaking at BizCan in Colombia in May. Well, what is the B2B conference landscape down there? And what are you going to be talking about?
So the B2B landscape down there is constantly evolving. There used to be several conferences. I spoke at one called Expo Cannabis in Cartagena. They haven't had one recently. Colombia it's been a challenging market because there was a lot of money put into that area, into that country 5 to 7 years ago, primarily from a lot of the Canadian public companies that they saw how it was a perfect place to cultivate. You could have pretty much year-round cultivation, also a highly educated workforce down there, so really smart, highly educated executive teams that were able to be put together. And then geographically, it's located someplace that just really makes a lot of sense for it to be a great hub for kind of bridging South America to the rest of the world. So unfortunately, what happened is that as has happened in pretty much many places throughout the world, is that the political landscape never fully caught up to what the capacities were for the industry. And so even though it's legal to cultivate and produce in Colombia, there's no legal way to sell them domestically. So everything has to be created for export right now. And the import export international import export model right now is still very nascent, and so there's not this fully robust opportunity. So a lot of these cultivators and processing plants are sitting on a ton of product, and so there's with limited options. So it's been a really challenging time down there. Now they elected a president last year who ran on a pro-cannabis platform, and so there was a lot of positive sentiment around that. But he's had a lot of challenges just in general getting any of his policies passed through the legislature, including cannabis, which was not voted through last year when he put it through. So where that kind of led for at BizCan is that there's it's one of the few remaining sort of business to business conferences that's going on down there. I haven't been assigned my specific topic yet, so I can't say what
Oh,
exactly
okay.
I'm going to be talking about yet, but there's a couple of different areas because, obviously I'm one of the few probably, US, brand, builders that has taken brands into South America, has taken them into Mexico. So it'll probably be something along those lines. I've also done some educational programs for brand building in multiple languages. And so there may be something that I'll be talking about along those lines as well. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. I every year I go, I'm always fascinated to kind of just check in because I haven't been since last year because I was going to go down and do some more things down there. But when the legislature didn't go through, it just kind of put the brakes on what was possible. And it just didn't make
Yeah,
much sense to spend, the time for my brands down there. So it's a process, as you know. I mean, if you were just in,
yeah,
I know as you were, you see, it's like it feels like in all these different places throughout the world, it's like,
yeah,
2 step forward, 1 step back, it's
yeah,
one
yeah.
step forward, 2 steps back.
I know. And then where do you want to put your loss leaders? Where do you want to invest the long-term plan and things like that? So I'm sorry. So just to, I know you have to wrap it up too. But so basically, do you feel now that brands could start, you know, um, building brand awareness and kind of stepping into the market, or are you feeling like it's still kind of a little too early to put on the brakes? I mean, you are working with brands to go in there and consider it, I guess, and you can start figuring things out like that. But with the current president in Mexico, I think you were saying he's not in favor now. Like, when's the next election? When could that possibly turn? Or I guess their legislature could, if they just did something to move it along, that could move it along, since it's already been agreed upon that they want legalization, right?
Yeah. Well, so I'm much more bullish. So I'm bullish on Mexico. I think that's the biggest opportunity right now. I'd say probably second is Peru. Peru has a medical market that's very active. I mean, it's a little bit of a smaller country, but there are robust distribution chains, and they're starting to kind of move into a little bit more branding that's a little less medical focused down there. Colombia has huge potential, but it's just the fits and starts, so we'll
Yeah.
see. And then, they're starting to make some inroads in Argentina and Brazil. But again, the political instability in both those countries right now makes it a little challenging. Argentina now has a new president who's, doing some pretty drastic things down there that remains to be seen, how that's going to impact everything. So it's definitely very much of a, things can change very rapidly, and I continue to be long-term bullish on, everywhere in South America. However, I think the short-term opportunities in South America in particular are probably with Peru. Ecuador also has some interesting things going on down there. But again, smaller footprint. But Mexico, that's where I keep coming back to. It's just,
Yeah. Yeah.
especially if you're a US brand,
Yeah.
it's just much easier right now. There's a pathway to get down there. It's got a large population, and it's just easier to get your actual products, imported into Mexico right now.
Yeah.
That as long as they pass the testing and fall under the regs, you can get your products down there. So yeah, that's where I've been focusing. Those are the brands the brands that I'm working with and talking to. That's where we're focusing on. No different than if someone's like, "Oh, I want to get my brand into Texas," right? Well, it's
Oh,
like,
yeah.
right, and so a lot of companies, yeah, a lot of cannabis brands, they haven't publicly announced themselves yet, so I don't want to I can't really say who they are, but I know about them because they want to take some of their brand portfolio down to Mexico. But they have created a um, a whole company around getting the hemp rights for cannabis brands, like big cannabis brands, and helping them expand. It's really like it's very similar to a lot of like what they call the brand extension deals, right? In traditional brand marketing. There's agencies that's all they do. We work with one actually a prohibited called Beanstalk. They're a Omnicom company. All they do is they are the ones that take like, they take like whatever, like Godiva chocolate, right? And they come up with like a coffee pod to Godiva chocolate.
Oh, brand extensions.
They
Yes,
do
I
the
see.
brand extension stuff. And so really I look at like these hemp products and even the accessories. It's like, that's really in general where I'm kind of focusing on, because I just got so fed up with banging my head against the wall for like trying to like deal with the regulated THC market. Like let me focus on brand extension, and so
Yeah,
that's kind
yeah.
of what I'm doing. But for
Mexico.
Mexico, that's what I'm doing. And then I'm also going to be able to announce something soon where I'm doing some things around apparel here in the US, where I'm taking some cannabis brands into some legal e-commerce channels.
Whoever, like the bigger brands are definitely announcing their hemp versions, for their brand extensions. That's the model they're kind of all going back to, is the hemp version, the brand
Yeah,
extension.
and it's going to be interesting to see like, kind of what ends up happening with all this, right, on the federal level, like, because there's a lot of talk right now, no action, but a lot of talk.
Yeah,
I'm sure it's an election season, so
I
there's,
know. I'm dying. Ugh. Well,
but
look at what happened with
it's
Germany today.
just act, you know, let's
I
just
know.
let's just, I mean, even, I know there's a lot of mixed opinions about the DEA, kind of what they're going to do, but I'm one of these people who's just talking to family offices, high net worth individuals, because I was trying to raise money for my last company, and I just had a really hard time because so many of these people are just still sitting on the sidelines waiting for a positive sign. So even rescheduling, even though I know there's a lot of backlash against it, it's going to unlock a lot of new capital to come into this
Yeah.
sector that's going to help everyone, right? And it's a
The
step in the right direction.
280E, it's going to open. I mean, that their margins are going to increase because without 280E, that's like right off the bat.
Yeah.
That's going to give them money to spend in their marketing department or wherever, their brand extension department. You know, it's just, yeah, it's like, come on, save us. We're drowning.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, but I think today the news that Germany, it was official that they passed the first, pillar of decriminalizing and taking cannabis off the narcotics list in their country. So
Yeah.
that's like descheduling. That's similar. I mean, it took it off that's like, come on, Germany just did this, guys.
Yeah. Germany's well, look, I get, as a brand person, I don't love the German approach because, just kind of keeping everything to to these clubs. I mean,
Yeah, I know.
there's no branding that's going to be involved,
No.
really, but look, at the end of the day, it's about the plant, helping people and being, so this is that, again, it's a step in the right direction. It's
Yeah, it's a
the
step
largest.
yeah. They're not ready for brands. I mean, I think that's what they call, because I've been looking at that whole market. The second pillar is kind of opening it up for more of the rec. Like they go in the pillars of what they're, how they're letting everything out. But yeah, it's definitely a slow start compared to what we did. We legalized and brands came running. So they're not allowing that. As a matter of fact, they're not even allowing flower if Spain goes. In France and Spain, it's only vape and or tinctures